Hello, everybody, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. It's Monday, it's August 10th, and we're experiencing another week of the pandemic, COVID-19. I'm so happy to be with all of you today. Last Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, all of our power went out, and I had no electricity until 8 o'clock last night. It's one thing to be dealing with the pandemic and COVID-19 and all that that entails, but also not being able to watch television, go on the internet, make a phone call, all the things that we take for granted. I started today's show with no fanfare, no music, because I wanted to try something a little different today. Normally, our shows are about show business and how artists are dealing with the pandemic and everything. But I'm very, very excited about our guest today, Dr. Judi Bloom. And Dr. Judi Bloom was brought to me through Rob Lowe of Casting New Lives. Both of us are clients. We've never met. We're meeting now for the very first time. And I want to thank you, as I said before we began the program today. It's been quite a road to get to this point. Originally, I sent her the wrong information, the wrong day. So she thought that we were going to be doing this on the 5th. I didn't think that we were doing this on the 5th. But I get a notice from Rob Lowe, who is our manager. And he said, Dr. Bloom is concerned about you because she hasn't heard from you. And I said, what are you talking about? Our electricity's out, but this is the case. And then he mentioned, and I said, that can't be. And then she sent me the email that I sent her, and I did indeed say that we were going to do the show on the 5th. Now, the 5th has a very special day in my life because it marks the 41st anniversary of my coming to New York. And I was scheduled to do a show that night celebrating my 41 years in New York. That, of course, went out of the way. I was supposed to teach, I'm going to not say supposed, I was scheduled to do a master class with the theater camp last Wednesday. That got tossed out. Everything that I had on my calendar this past week completely got thrown out the door. And it's like a microcosm of everything else that we're experiencing, the things that we are used to having in our lives, the things that are no longer here. And Dr. Bloom is a therapist. I can't think of a better time to speak to you. Thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me. And we all need a little therapy right now. I think that's a really good idea.
I am so thrilled you're here. Before we talk about your practice and your life and everything, how are you doing in the midst of all of this?
You know, it's a challenge. I mean, I'm still seeing my patients, as well, and helping them dealing with everything, as well as just, personally not being able to see them in my office. I'm doing teletherapy now, right? It's totally different. I quite like it, actually, and a lot of my patients like it as well. Mm-hmm. And just, personal, challenges and upheavals, my children, how they're dealing with it. They're young adults, but they don't live here in the Los Angeles area. They both are on the East Coast. So,
are they here in New York?
My daughter's in New York, and my son is in Miami.
Wow.
So they're both on the East Coast. And those populations have their own challenges, which are a little different from what's going on in California. Mm-hmm. So, helping them with those kinds of things, it's challenging for everybody. I think it's fortunate that I'm able to pivot, if you will, in terms of at least career moves and, being able to see patients regardless and all that. So that's, for me personally, that's fortunate. So
now, for those of us who were in the theater, everything stopped on March 12th.
Right.
And I am assuming that as a therapist, your business probably began to thrive as a result of all of this. Is that true?
Initially, just the opposite. Initially, people freaked out to the point of saying, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about anything. And they were, not comfortable with the idea of transitioning to teletherapy. It was something that was, fairly new for me as well. So learning how to do that and how to make it work, even the technology, right? So there was a period, an initial period, where actually my own business dropped off significantly.
Mhm.
And then it started to come back again. And in fact, now is getting, quite a lot heavier again.
I can imagine. I mean, how, except for the obvious,
Mhm.
what are some of the biggest changes that you've had to experience with everything that's going on with everyone for yourself personally?
For myself personally, I'm an optimist by nature.
Okay.
Okay.
I am too, yeah, to be honest with you.
So that helps a lot. And one of the things that I teach people is, using cognitive behavioral kinds of techniques to help them look at things differently and understand where distortions are coming in their ways of thinking and how that affects their mood,
Mhm.
right? Because what we think influences how we feel. There's also something I'll want to get into, which is called the behavioral immune system. It's the behavioral immune response to COVID, which I hadn't really heard about until recently. The BBC did a story on it that I came across. So there's quite a bit in that study as well I want to get into, but not quite yet.
Okay.
But so personally, that was a pivot that I was able to do just by my own nature, I think, as well. I love to walk. I'm a walker. And that's one of the few things we've been able to do
Absolutely.
during COVID,
Absolutely.
right, is walk. So again, for me, that was something natural to gravitate towards. And I know how beneficial that is because it raises our serotonin and dopamine levels. Those are our natural feel-good chemicals in the brain, right? So I've been doing even more walking, which is terrific. And I fortunately live in an area where walking is easy and accessible. People think of LA as being all cars. I don't even own a car. So it's not necessarily true, okay? And especially where I am in Santa Monica, California, it's very easy to just walk everywhere.
Beautiful area. Wow.
Very beautiful. And that helps too. I can walk to the ocean, look at the ocean, feel a whole lot better.
How often do you get to see the ocean from where you are? I mean, where are you in proximity to the ocean?
20 blocks. So
Wow.
I walk to the ocean virtually every day.
Mhm.
And I'm not going in the ocean. It's very cold. The ocean.
The Pacific Ocean is always.
Exactly.
I mean, I used to go to Malibu every August for 15 years, and the ocean was always cold.
Yeah, it's always
in August. So,
yeah. I don't swim in LA.
so having your patients and everything, it's given you somewhat of a structure in your life. And
Right.
I think that, I can only speak from the point of view of an entertainer and those of us who are in this business where everything has just been cut off. And I know it's going to sound like an obvious question that I'm about to ask you, but what is your advice as far as creating structure in everyone's life and how important that is?
It's critical. It's critical for you. It's critical if you have children to create structure for them. They thrive with structure. They really do. So it's having a routine, doing things, normalizing behavior as much as you can. So it's getting up in the morning and doing the routine you would do if you're going to work. Okay. Getting dressed, having breakfast, whatever your routine is. Maybe you do morning yoga stretches, whatever it is. Okay. Just do your routine and have a plan for the day so that you know what the day is going to look like. Structure it. Okay. I'm going to have creative time here. I'm going to have maybe look for work. If I'm out of work, I'm going to look for work during these hours, not all day. Structure it. Maybe create meditation time, create time to go for a walk or to do, some kind of an exercise class online, a yoga class or another exercise class. There's tons of free classes out there. So there's really kind of no excuse for somebody, to not be able to access it and do it. But again, it requires commitment. I was talking to somebody just earlier today. I was talking to a patient who was saying, before all this happened, she had a really good yoga practice and she'd do, cycling and all kinds of things. She was very active. And since this began, she's found it really hard to just motivate herself to do those things, especially just to motivate even to do it via an online platform, just watching a class and doing it along. And she said she'd think about it for an hour and come up with all these excuses and then realize she could have spent that hour doing the exercises, right? So, we really talked about that today, about just scheduling it in, and not making it something where you're going to defeat yourself. So make it realistic. You may not want to meditate for half an hour, but you could probably commit to 5 minutes. Okay, that's it. Just commit to those 5 minutes.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about what I just experienced this past week, because and this is not going to be a therapy session for myself. Okay. But when I basically had the structure of these virtual events that I do online and everything, and then when we lost power last Tuesday, I felt paralyzed. Yeah. I felt paralyzed because all of the things that I had to look forward to were essentially taken away from me.
Right.
And again, as we are in this pandemic, it was very difficult to even fathom how long this was going to go on. Where do we get to the next level? And I literally was climbing the walls. These things that are curveballs thrown our way. What advice do you offer your patients in terms of, and again, I'm not making this a therapy session, but, in terms of how we, what advice you give in terms of getting through something like this?
Resiliency is what we're talking about, okay? Self-efficacy, knowing what you are capable of doing, that you can get through whatever life challenges head your way, because you've done it before. And it's important to think about other times when you've been challenged. It's a difficult time, you're frustrated, maybe angry, you're feeling hopeless, a little helpless, right? We're all feeling that way during COVID, right? A little helpless, a little hopeless, all those feelings that come up, and it's really based on what you're telling yourself. So even something like you just experienced, to remind yourself, first of all, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it will be temporary. Sooner or later, the power will come on. Okay, what can I do right now in order to deal with it? And, the kinds of things you can do. Well, I can read, okay, by candlelight or by flashlight if necessary, right? I can read. I can go for a walk during the day, okay? You don't need power to do that. So it's finding alternatives. What else can I do? I can write. You're creative, right? I can write. I could paint. This is a great time for a lot of people to tap that side of themselves and really find the creative expression for pent-up feelings. That's what artists do all the time, right? So it's finding those inner resources that we all have. And again, reminding yourself that what you tell yourself is how you feel. So if you're telling yourself this is going to last forever, and I'm not getting this done, and I'm not getting that done, and I didn't get to do my show this week, or whatever, all that. Stop telling yourself that. Instead, start to tell yourself what you can do. And finding other alternatives, accepting the situation for what it is, and then committing to a plan of action. So that's really the best way to tackle something like that right from the get-go.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the arc of your career. Did you pursue this, or did it pursue you? A question that we're normally asked as artists.
Right. A little bit of both.
Okay.
I was a television news anchor and reporter for 15 years, so for a very long time in New York and in Los Angeles and also Miami and Philadelphia. And it was a very rewarding career for me personally, and something I enjoyed on a lot of levels and found very intellectually stimulating as well. But when I had kids...
Had you already studied to be a therapist at this point?
No. Right out of college, actually, I started in the business at 19. I graduated Cornell young and went right into the business, right? WNEW in New York. That was my first job. So as a gopher, a production assistant, go for this, go for that. That's where I started. But so I did this for 15 years very successfully. And then when I had kids, I realized I really couldn't be the kind of parent I needed to be and keep doing what I was doing. Because you work crazy hours, you work holidays, you travel, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't work real well with kids. You can do it with kids if you're comfortable having maybe a full-time nanny, that kind of thing, to rely on. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And I realized that this was really far more important to me, especially at that point. So I figured, okay, well, back to the drawing board. What else can I do? I'd been a psych major initially at Cornell, so that interest was always there. So that's where I'm saying it's kind of a little bit of both. And I figured, well, that's something I could do and work my hours around my children's needs. if I go into private practice. So that's what I did. I went back to school, got my master's, got my doctorate, did my internship, the whole 9 yards, changed
How were
careers.
you able to juggle all that? I mean, how old were your kids at the time?
2 and 4.
Wow. Well, applaud you
Yeah,
for
little
that.
kids. It was a challenge. Believe me, it was a challenge. But you do it. You just kind of make your mind up. I can do this, and I'm going to figure out a way. And if you really set your mind to it, you will. You will figure out a way to make it happen.
Mhm.
I didn't sleep much. Um, can always sleep, right? Yeah, as they say, sleep when you're dead, right?
You missed that aspect of your career?
Pardon? Second?
You missed that aspect of your career?
I do. I mean, I loved being a reporter,
Mhm.
particularly. And there are things about it that I do miss. But there are also things about it I don't miss, and things about the industry, that being in the industry full time, that I don't miss. So, and especially seeing the way news has evolved over the years, it was much more factual news when I was doing it, as opposed to opinion news, if you will.
Exactly.
So I don't miss that, and I love what I do now. So I feel so blessed to have had 2 really rewarding careers. That's really lovely. And I have 2 fantastic kids as a result also, because I was able to do what I did. And they're very grateful that I did that.
That's
So,
great. And when, where, and how did you make the jump from New York to Santa Monica?
New York was WNEW, as I said. I started there. Wound up doing an undercover investigative report on nursing home conditions in New York City at the time. And we uncovered all kinds of abuses, both physically and financially, that were going on in these dozen nursing homes in New York City. And wound up finding out that they were actually all owned by the same person under different LLCs, and wound up sending him to jail.
Wow.
It became a huge story in New York at the time. This is a long time ago. And that kind of catapulted me into my career as a reporter. And again, I was quite young. I was 21 or 22 by that point. And
10 years ago.
Right, 10 years ago. And then I went from there to Miami, and went to work for the ABC station in Miami as their midday anchor and reporter for the evening news. Was there for a couple of years, and then went from there to ABC in Philadelphia. Was there for a couple of years, and then got hired. Well, I decided actually at that point that I was tired of the cold weather and wanted to go somewhere warm. So it was sort of after Philadelphia in terms of market size. It was sort of, all right, New York or LA is sort of the next step, if you will. And I talked to my original boss at WNEW in New York, and who had now risen up the ranks and was now head of the whole thing. And told him we'd stayed in touch, and I told him I was interested in moving. And he said, yeah, you're ready now. He said, you want to come to New York? And I said, no, I want to go to LA. And he said, all right, fine, LA, Judi. And that's how I wound up in LA.
And did you have any friends or family in LA, or was this?
No, didn't know a soul.
And did your children go with you at the time? Or
I wasn't married at the time.
Okay.
I changed careers after my kids.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, no, I came to LA single and, as a reporter. So, that was, well, no, I take that back. I'd gotten married. I was married a short period of time from Philadelphia to Los Angeles, if you will, during that bridge period. And then that ended shortly thereafter, and we're still friends.
And what was the biggest obstacle or challenge for you coming from the East Coast to the West Coast as a single woman or as a single person?
Well, as when I became a single person, again, shortly after moving to LA, I guess the biggest challenge was meeting people who I felt were real, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, New Yorkers tell you what they think. They're in your face, right? It's, there's just no BS. And Californians are more polite in a way about that kind of stuff.
But don't you find, I mean, and I know it's a generality, but I'm reading a book now and it said, about the industry that in New York, people will be direct with, I want this
Mm-hmm.
and I want it now.
Right.
And in California, somebody walks into a room and they're like a searchlight searching to where they feel that they need to gravitate towards.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's kind of, I can see that. I can see some of that. And I love LA. Let me be clear. I mean, I'm a Californian, at this point, certainly as much as I am a New Yorker. So I'm a bit of both. But it's, it takes a while, I think, for people to feel comfortable at a different pace. I mean, the pace of New York, right? There's something going on every minute and you're boom, 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 really high energy all the time. California is a little more laid back. That's the reputation, and deservedly so. That's lovely once you get used to it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you can breathe. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. I don't have to do 15 things in the next 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it's finding that balance and then appreciating the balance. As I tell people all the time, really having gratitude for what you do have in your life and where you are in your life at all times. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is look out the window and have gratitude because the sun is shining. That's it. That's it. That's all I have to have gratitude for. The sun is shining. Cool. I woke up this morning. Excellent. Gratitude, wherever you can find it. Because I guarantee somebody's life is worse than yours.
And I agree with that. I totally agree with that. But so you've been a therapist now for 26 years.
Yeah.
And when you first set out, how do you find your patients? How do they find you?
Well, when you first set out, you do internships, right? So you get patients for a very low fee, but you get patients through whatever clinic you're working for initially, and then through I did a private practice internship as well, and through that private practice internship. So the initial patients and the initial training happens that way. That's after you get the doctorate. Mm-hmm. And you kind of build on that, and then it's really, a lot of it is word of mouth. A lot of my referrals are just old patients who have referred other people. It's also, I'll get referrals from doctors. And from attorneys, marriage and, family attorneys, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Doctors for patients dealing with anxiety or other issues, depression, right? So that's also a referral source, if you will. But a lot of it really is just really old patients and connections with other therapists, where maybe they'd see the husband and I'd see the wife, or whatever, that kind of thing.
Now, this may sound like a silly question that I'm asking you, but as a lay person, when someone comes to you for therapy, it's an ongoing process with you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is there a time where you feel that it's time for them to move on, or is that a decision that they have to make, or how does that, how does it happen?
It's kind of a joint decision, Generally, it's up to the patient how long they want to continue. I mean, it's all ultimately up to the patient. For some people, there are insurance constraints where they're given X number of sessions. They have to live with that.
Okay.
But for people where that isn't an issue, it's really just about their own level of development and how attached they become to me and just wanting to work with me. I have a patient I've been seeing for 23 years. Mm-hmm. I started seeing her when she was 16 years old, and I still see her at this point once every 2 weeks. Okay? Mm-hmm. Not every week, but once every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And not so much because she's got any major issues that we haven't talked about, but because she likes using me, I think, as a sounding board for a lot of the day-to-day stuff that she goes through. And certainly now she's a teacher, kindergarten teacher. So with a 4-year-old. So, it has to adapt to that, teaching Zoom, lessons online, and, those challenges with having a 4-year-old at home, and, all of that, those challenges.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some
Life
of the
changes, right?
challenges that everyone is dealing with right now. And since you mentioned that she's a teacher, a kindergarten teacher and everything,
Right.
one of the big things that a lot of people are really afraid of right now is sending their kids to school in the midst of all this. Your thoughts on everything that's surrounding all of that right now?
It is very much an individual decision in a lot of cases. In some areas, it's what the government decides or the local government decides in terms of how safe it is or isn't to reopen schools. And then you have to decide on your own individual circumstances how safe it is or isn't to resume school. Perhaps you have an elderly relative that lives with you or you're in contact with a lot, or somebody with an immune system deficiency, so all those things enter into it. I mean, this particular patient I was referring to, for instance, her husband is diabetic. So it'd be very unsafe for her to return to the classroom given his condition. Right? So these are all things that factor into any one individual's decision about whether or not they should go back to school. There's also, and this goes a little bit into the behavioral immune response that I mentioned earlier. And what that is, this is a new BBC study that was done by, the author was David Robeson. And I just came across this very recently. And without realizing it, the COVID really affects our behavioral response as well as our immune response. It affects our home life, it affects our politics, because our behaviors were evolved to avoid getting a disease. So our initial line of defense, even before the body, is actually to create distance. Somebody's sick, you stay away from them, right? They're sick. So even though now we're being told, maintain distance, right? At least 6 feet, between people. It actually also goes back to that behavioral immune response. It's that kind of instinctive social distancing, if you will, that enters in. It's very much kind of our better safe than sorry. Think of the tiger at the gate, right? And you're either going to fight, flight, or freeze, right? So the flight would be avoiding it, right? Fighting would be challenging it, which our immune response actually does, is try to challenge it, not terribly successfully without a vaccine at the moment, but that's the initial response of your immune system. So these are all really different behaviors that evolve. And we also develop a more conformist behavior, which is deferring to authority, a kind of a herd mentality, if you will. Having resentment towards nonconformists is part of it. Let me ask you, how do you feel about people who walk around without masks?
Well, my thought about everything is that I'm not responsible for what anyone else does. I'm only responsible for how I respond to it.
Right.
And I'm finding that with myself personally, that I have a mantra that I say every morning when I get up. And that is, stay in your lane and keep your blinders on. And if I do that, I find that I have a very productive day. The problem for me is social media after 9 p.m. at night. And the reason I say that is because I find that at 9 p.m., a lot of people are letting their guard down. A lot of people maybe are drinking, having had a frustrating day. Or a good day. People are posting pictures of themselves with masks, some without mask. People are pointing fingers at other people who are wearing masks or not wearing masks. I personally have pretty much been quarantining. I have not been to a restaurant, even to eat outdoors. The last event that I went to was in March. So for me personally, it's all about me being responsible for me and not really, if someone wants to do without wearing a mask, I can choose to avoid those people.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, a very healthy way to look at it. In general, what we're seeing is divisions around the country that seem to mimic political divisions, right? And again, that goes back to this herd mentality that develops.
Mhm.
So if you're in an area of the country where people aren't wearing masks, then that becomes the norm. And you're looked at funny if you do wear a mask.
Well, do you
If
think
you're in an area of the country where people wear masks, then that's the norm, and you're looked at funny if you don't wear a mask. So a lot of that really is this kind of behavioral immune response
Mhm.
that happens depending on where you are. And that affects everything from politics currently to attitudes about racism, to and immigration, to COVID, and how people are responding to that. So a lot of that really is based in this behavioral immune response.
Well, for me, I don't even remember, at least in my psyche, hearing the word tribalism
Mhm.
until within probably the last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Maybe it's a word that you were familiar with, that you were hearing about, but this tribalism that we have now
Mhm.
of, if you don't agree with what I believe in, I'm going to block you. I'm
Right.
going to unfriend you. I'm going to kick you off of Facebook.
Mhm.
And I think that Facebook and social media in general have given all of us a false sense of importance.
Mhm.
Am I right or wrong in terms of the way that I'm looking at these things?
I don't know if it's a false sense of importance. I do think we certainly have a false sense of connection with a lot of people on social media.
Yes.
Uh, it's become a way of standing in the band shell and preaching to as many people as can hear you. And I think that's kind of what it's evolved to.
Mm-hmm.
And people, wanting followers, they want to know that other people agree with them. And going back to this herd mentality,
Mm-hmm.
the tribalism, if you will.
Exactly.
You're part of my tribe. Okay, so it definitely, I think, has exacerbated that phenomenon. It's always been there, but I think it's really exacerbated it because it makes it so much more present and daily. Multiple times a day for some people. They're on there all the time. I think people should really learn how to limit their exposure to social
Well,
media.
I was going to ask you, without putting you on the spot, how do you navigate social media in the midst of this crazy political climate that we're in right now?
Yeah, I put up basically nothing political at this point at all. I'll put up pictures of me and my kids, or that kind of stuff, or psychological tips for people, how to handle what's going
Now,
on.
I have a very interesting question here from one of our Judi Mark, and she says, Dr. Judi, deal with a partner under the same roof is very difficult, especially if political views are opposite.
Right.
How should we deal with that other than not talk about it?
Avoiding hot button issues is definitely the best way to handle it, if you can. Not always practical. If you're living with people with different views, being respectful, just understanding that neither one of you is necessarily right or wrong. You have different opinions, and it's okay for people to have different opinions, and just be respectful of that. Don't try to change somebody's mind. It's not going to work. People get into these endless arguments over whatever, and it's really pointless because people are going to believe what they believe. So save your breath.
How do you think
people believe what they believe, and that's okay for them to believe. You don't have to agree.
How do you think we got to this point where it is so divided? It's tearing families apart. It's tearing best friends apart.
Yeah.
If someone has a different way of thinking other than yourself,
Uh-huh.
how did we get here?
Well, I don't think it's just COVID that brought us here. Let's start
Like that, I agree with.
This has just made it more evident, if you will, especially because it's thrown people into situations, for instance, that they're living with people who they don't normally live with. It's a whole lot easier, if mom and dad are 3,000 miles away, and you don't have to agree with them all the time. And it's okay. You only have to see them Thanksgiving and Christmas or whatever. So it's kind of that. That's always been here, but it's just more in our face now, if you will.
Mhm.
That goes back to social media as well. It's very in our face about people's opinions about everything, and everybody having to have their say about what they really think and challenge somebody else who doesn't agree with them. So I don't think there's any one thing that has changed at all. It's been evolving over years. Certainly, the political divide is far, far more evident now than I think it's ever been. There's
Mhm.
always been political divide, but it's
Of
more
course.
evident now. And again, I think people feel really kind of just helpless and hopeless in so many ways that they take it out on taking I can at least put my foot in the sand about this. I can take a strong stance about this. At least that's something I can control. Everybody feels out of control. Everyone, because
Mhm.
we are out of control about the disease. We can't control it. There's no vaccine yet. The only thing we can control is our own behavior, like wearing masks, social distancing, etc., washing your hands.
Mhm.
Those things you can control, but the rest of it, you really can't. Can you control whether you're going to get hired again next week, and because you got laid off your job? No, you can't control that. So, we're feeling out of control in so many areas that people try to over control in the areas that they can control, like their opinions about things.
Mhm.
That would be a good example of it. So it's really this combination of events that I think have led us to this point in time.
And in addition to navigating through social media and everything, we are also in a 24/7 news cycle.
Yes, indeed.
Where, on CNN, MSNBC, every time they come back from a commercial break, breaking news, everything's breaking news,
Right.
and it's constant.
Yeah.
And for me, I remember everything changing when 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
That all of a sudden we're seeing a scroll on the bottom of the screen, and 3 or 4 news stories are going on at the same time.
Right.
Um, Again, what are your methods in terms of tuning all of that out?
I recommend people not watch 24/7 news, for one thing. And this is coming from a former news person, right? A
Mhm.
news junkie, but limiting the amount of time you spend doing that. I mean, I tend to really only watch the half-hour network news, because that's about as unbiased as you can get
Mhm.
in this day. I read the LA Times from cover to cover, so that's another source of news. And then I'll dabble and I'll actually flit around. I mean, I'll watch all of the all news channels just to see
Mhm.
what each one of them is saying. But I won't watch them for very long. I'll watch them, 15, 20 minutes each. So maybe a grand total of an hour. But that's it. And maybe not even that long.
Do you have
Um,
a shutdown time each night?
for news, yeah.
Mhm.
I don't watch news after 7 o'clock at night.
Not a
Uh,
good idea. I agree with you.
That's it. After that, I'll watch a movie, a television show, a movie. I'll read a book. That's enough. It's enough news. It's enough news. Uh,
And this idea, you asked me about the situation of mask versus non-mask.
mhm.
Uh, what is the experience like in California? I know that here in New York, unfortunately, and I just before we came live, I was reading an article. So many of our restaurants right
Mhm.
now are in danger of shutting
Yeah,
down.
here
Uh,
too.
if Restaurants, and I don't know what's going to happen once we go into the colder months,
Yeah.
because we are still not able to eat indoors.
Mhm.
Um, what is the situation there, and how are you navigating around this issue?
Um, well, I find I'll use Santa Monica since I live here as sort of an example. Uh, Early on, when they started to recommend people wear masks, I would say 50% of the people wore masks and 50% didn't. Just about half and half.
Mhm.
Now, so then they finally started opening things up, right? And the numbers skyrocketed, and they started to close things down again. So once that happened, I've seen a lot more people wearing masks. I
Mhm.
think it sort of hit them that, ooh, if we want to keep these newfound freedoms we have, like I can go to the beauty parlor and get my hair done.
Mhm.
You know, maybe we better, stick to the guidelines and see if that works. So I
Are
said,
people really adhering to the guidelines, would you say, on a major scale in California right now?
in my area of California, they are. I can't speak for the rest of the state.
Mhm.
There are certainly areas in the state where that isn't true. And there are areas of the state where they're sort of, very anti-mask.
Mhm.
Again, it's almost political. Um, so it really depends where you are, and that's where that political tribalism, influences behavior. Uh, so it's really interesting. So for me personally, yes, I wear a mask always when I walk out the door, and if I do eat out, and I don't a lot, but if I do, it's social distancing, it's outdoors, it's all those things.
Mhm.
Only with people I either live with or know really well.
With both of your kids being on the East Coast, have you had a chance to travel to see them, or have they traveled to see you? And what has that experience been like for either of you?
Yeah. Fortunately, I have seen them.
Okay.
Both my daughter actually came out to LA initially from New York when New York was started in March, when New York started shutting down. She left New York and came out to LA because she was working remote. She could work remotely, so she figured she would be better off working remotely from LA than New York at that time. She's now back in New York,
Okay.
and so I got to spend time with her and see her. I've seen my son both once in Florida and again in LA, where he was traveling for work-related reasons. So it's I've been fortunate in that way. And as I mentioned, I went to Florida as well for a couple of weeks and spent some time there and saw both kids while I was there.
Now,
So,
what was that experience like? Because Miami right now is such a political hotbed with everything that's going on, not only with COVID, but with the mask situation.
sure, it is. I hear about that from my son. I did not go to Miami. I was actually on the west coast of Florida when I went,
Okay.
and they traveled. They both got COVID tests and then came to me to
Mhm.
visit me when I was in Naples, Florida, and they came to visit me in Naples. So, again, personally, that worked out fine,
Mhm.
and we're all very conscious and very protective. Even flying on the airplanes with both face shields and masks, and my daughter wore a hazmat suit when she had to travel on the airplane. I mean, very careful. Um, so I've heard from my son, that a lot of people in Miami are very resistant to masks, especially younger people. And he's in the uh, club business. He, is a big club promoter, and he also is a yoga teacher. Has his own yoga studio there. So
Well,
he's
he's got a
working on
double
both ends.
whammy with all this.
Yeah, double whammy, exactly. So had to pivot, like everybody else. But it was frustrating for him as well, seeing his friends not wanting to wear a mask and not wanting to honor the, social distancing requirements and all that. And he's had to kind of navigate around that and find his own way around that.
Mhm.
So, you do what you can do, right?
Well, one of the other subjects that so many people are dealing with right now is the racial divide in this
Mhm.
country,
Yeah.
and with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything. And it's reached a point where a lot of people are afraid to even speak out because
Hmm.
they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing,
Right.
or they're going to say something that's politically incorrect or something.
Right.
Can you touch on that for a moment?
Yeah, it's again the behavioral immune response thing is, I think, really germane here and interesting, because the studies show that we have harsher moral judgments. People are less tolerant of others. There's more xenophobia and racism, actually, as a result of this behavioral response, immune response that we've got. Um, and studies showed that during the Ebola outbreak in 2014, it had a negative effect on attitudes towards gay men and lesbians, and more suspicion of different cultural backgrounds. People are more xenophobic, more racist. It really, a lot of that is a result of this behavioral immune response system that we have. So it's having to first recognize it, that that's what's going on with us, and then fight it. First step is awareness. So being aware that that is what's going on. I do think it's difficult. I've talked to, a number of my Black friends about, how somebody who isn't can best help, if you will, can best figure out their own way of addressing racism and being aware of any racist tendencies that you might have, that you might not normally even kind of be conscious of, but really calling yourself on it, kind of saying, oh, wow, did that thought even cross my mind, So really calling yourself on those kinds of things, really being conscious of it, not expecting somebody else to tell you how to do it. I know, that's not their problem. It's your problem.
Are you finding that more and more people are becoming absolutely more aware of racism within themselves because of everything that we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, I think people are. I think they're becoming more conscious of it, and saying, again, sort of, wow, I don't even know where that comes from. Why would I even think that? And that's a good first step. Again, awareness is the first step. So just being really conscious of any kind of automatic thoughts that come up around race or around immigrants of any kind, as you need to do around, tendencies towards homophobia or transphobia. These are all things that there are cultural messages that we're not even aware of, that we've grown up with. And it's really difficult to sometimes see them.
To me, right now, it's this weird goulash that we are all in the midst of. It's these things that are swirling around us every single day with the COVID and whether or not to wear a mask and the political climate and the Black Lives Matter moment. And it's like this hotbed that is just bubbling over. And in addition to the fact that we're all dealing with COVID right now, we are all dealing with this feeling. For me, there are days when I feel like I'm walking around on eggshells. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, blame anyone for what I'm feeling or not feeling, and vice versa. It's just such a strange time that we're in.
It is a strange time, but again, that's because you're becoming more conscious, right? You're thinking about it more, right? Yeah. Think about it before you speak. So it's that awareness, and that's a good thing. So even if it makes you a little uncomfortable at first and you feel a little tongue-tied, that's okay. That's a chance to go inward and say, okay, what is really going on? Why am I thinking that? Where's this coming from? And why would, where's the evidence that whatever I'm thinking is true? That's very important for all of this, is looking for evidence. I do an exercise with people that I call the 10 forms of twisted thinking. And because these are things that people in general tend to do. Okay, so no one's alone in doing this. Okay. It's pretty common. And so some of those, 10 forms of twisted thinking, okay, it's that black and white, all or nothing kind of thinking.
Right.
Most things are gray. They're not black and white. Overgeneralizing, looking at like a single negative event, like that's a never ending pattern, or just, focusing on one tiny negative thing and the rest doesn't matter, or just counting the positive. None of that counts. Okay. All the positive stuff. Jumping to conclusions, either mind reading, I know what someone else is thinking, and no, you don't, or fortune telling, I know what's going to happen. I don't know about you, but my crystal ball doesn't work very well. So no, you don't. Magnifying or minimizing, so blowing things out of proportion, catastrophizing, it's horrible, it's awful, it's the end of the world. No, very few things are truly, truly, truly awful. They may be difficult. They may be a pain in the butt, okay? They may be, uncomfortable. They may be frustrating, but they're not catastrophic. So being careful that you don't do that in your own mind. Using emotional reasoning. I feel like something's true, therefore it must be true. Nope. Show me the evidence. Just because you feel like it's true doesn't make it true. Should statements. I should do this, must do this, ought to do this, should. Stop shoulding on yourself. It's, there's only what is. And people have to accept that. If you want something to be different, do something different. But there's no shoulds.
No.
And labeling, so either calling yourself an idiot, a jerk, whatever, or calling somebody else that, or personalization and blame, so either thinking you're totally responsible for something when there are also outside forces at work, or the reverse, not taking your share of responsibility for something that happened. So those are the ways we twist things up in our heads. So if we can look at what our initial thought is, following it through to its illogical conclusion about anything, okay, that includes racism or homophobia or any of those kinds of things, politics, anything, COVID, job loss, anything. We just follow out what our negative thought pattern is around that, look at the ways we twist it up on our head, and then say, okay, if I stop twisting it up, if I don't do that anymore, how else can I look at the same thing? What do I absolutely know is true? I can prove it. That's the thought. And if you do that and you work through, it's good to do it on paper. It's called a mnemonic response. If you write it out on paper, it's the same reason in school people take notes and then you don't really even have to look at the notes. It just kind of gets it in your head.
It's interesting. One of my favorite books is The Artist Way by Julia Cameron.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with the book, but every morning she talks about doing your morning pages.
Right.
It's 3 pages. I do them every single morning.
That's terrific.
And it's not to go back and read anything or to second guess anything or whatever. I want to ask you, I'm going to change the subject for just a moment on a lighter note. And this is a shout out to Rob and to Brinka. How did you get involved with Casting New Lives?
They contacted me. Rob contacted me. He had seen some of the other video, radio, television interviews I've done. I've done quite a number over the years, and usually post them on Facebook. So he saw it on Facebook and just thought that I would be somebody he would like to work with. And I decided he was somebody I would like to work with. So,
that's great. And I'm very happy with them. Yeah. And I'm glad that they brought you my way. But I want to talk a little bit about SPY. Yes. Safe Place for Youth. I want to mention to everyone who's listening, either now or later on podcast, that we would like to raise a little money for SPY, which is Safe Place for Youth. So anything you can make, donate, whether it's $1, $5, $10.
Right.
I've donated. Please, 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 if you can, tell them a little bit about what SPY is all about and why you chose this charity.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful charity, and a friend of mine actually volunteers time there, which is how I, came across it. And there are 5,000 homeless young people in the Los Angeles area. 5,000, and we're talking late teens, early 20s. So these are kids who are coming out of the foster care system for the most part. A lot of them come out of abusive households, parents who do drugs. They've been sexually abused. They've been, victims of homo or transphobia, parental mental illness. So they wind up in this situation. This is not, we're talking about, fault. It's not, there's nothing that they did being born that caused this to happen. It is the result of the life they were given. And now they're out of the foster care systems and whatnot, or run away from home, and they're in their teens or early 20s. They have no skills. They have no money. And this is a place where they can learn how to live, how to take care of themselves. They have this incredible organic garden. It's in Venice, California, not in Santa Monica. Yes. A lot of those, Venice Beach is very, very famous, right, for the boardwalk in Venice, which has all these kind of kooky people, and it's fun to walk down and see all kinds of things. A lot of artists are on the boardwalk there. Well, a lot of these homeless youths also hang out in that area, trying to hustle and make money any way they can. So this is in Venice, and it's for as all of these youths to come and work in this organic garden. They learn how to cook. They make incredible organic meals with it that they then serve to the community. They have pet care, acting. They learn. They have a theater troupe that they've developed.
Find that with these kids, there's a prejudice against them sometimes that that's unwarranted, And it's really, it's sad, and and I'm so thrilled that you told me about this organization.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful, and it's so needed. It's not. This is again, this is a Los Angeles organization, but on a national level, this is an issue. This is a problem. Homeless use.
Is this organization nationwide?
No, they're based in Los Angeles.
Okay.
They're an LA charity, but there are other ones around the country, I'm sure, that are similar. And if there's not, maybe you can start one wherever you are,
It's really wonderful that they're there.
Really, really, really needed.
Well, I can't believe this, but we're almost at the very end of our show. I thank you once again for taking the time to be with us today. I want to tell everyone, if you've enjoyed today's show, please go to my website, richardskipper.com. Put your thoughts about the show in my guest book. That helps to boost us in other markets. If there's... I tell everyone at the end of every show, I want you to go to your Facebook page, and I want you to do the same thing, Dr. Bloom.
Okay.
Go to your Facebook page and go to the first name that pops up in your friends list.
Okay.
Call them tonight. Just to say, I'm thinking of you. Tell them I sent you your way. Is there anything that you want to say, or anything that we didn't cover today?
We really covered, I think, the bulk of it. I want people to, just remember, we're kind of having a national grief reaction. And think of what grief steps we go through: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So, the denial was at the beginning. None of this is happening. It can't be. There's some people still in denial that, COVID is even real. Okay, all that's denial. Anger, which is the frustration and the anger at whoever, at the government, at the disease itself, at whoever you're angry with at the moment, right? Bargaining, which is all the if onlys. If only we had done that. If only they had done this. If only, if only, if only. That's the bargaining. Depression, which is that sadness, that feeling of hopelessness or helplessness that people feel. And then finally, acceptance. And it's not quite linear. We go back and forth through those emotions. But to know that you're not alone in experiencing those things. We are all in this together, and we've made it through 5 months. If we've made it through 5 months, we can make it through the next 5 months.
I have a friend who says we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat.
That's very true.
Yes.
That's very true. And but together, if we all stay in our boat, stay in your lane, as you mentioned,
Yes.
Okay, stay in our boat, and we all keep paddling, we'll get there. Give it time. This is a for now. It's a for now. We have to accept this is it for now, but it will change, because it always does. And humanity has gone through far worse than this, far worse. So gratitude for what you do have, and like me, maybe the gratitude is you wake up in the morning and the sun's shining. Fantastic.
I love that. I love it. Well, I'm grateful for you. Thank you for the light
and for you.
The world. But everyone, please, if you can make a contribution to SPOT, information is at the bottom of the page. I will be posting this on all my social media platforms. Please make a contribution if you can. I also want to let everyone know that next Monday, my guest will be Bill Berloni, who is the animal trainer to all the animals on Broadway. He's trained all of the Sandys in all of the productions of Annie. He's directed all the Totos in The Wizard of Oz, and the Winn-Dixie, so many shows. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, Richard.
And I wish you and your children and everyone peace and a little comfort.
Peace, comfort, and good health.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.